General liability is comparable to a seatbelt when driving. It is the most basic form of security, but will it cover you fully in the event of a crash? So getting right into it, what is general liability insurance and is it enough protection for your business? So here's what you're going to learn specifically in this video. Number one is you're going to learn exactly what general liability insurance is. Two, you're going to learn what it covers. Three, you're going to learn what it doesn't cover. Four is you're going to learn when it is enough of a coverage or if you need additional coverages. And five is you're going to learn when you do need an additional coverage in addition to your general liability policy. So what is general liability insurance? Well, general liability insurance is the foundation of most business insurance plans, and it protects you against the most common risks. Basically, if you have a business, you probably need general liability insurance, with the exception of those small one-man show businesses that are running the business out of the house. Maybe in those scenarios, the most you'll need is a cyber liability policy and you should be good. But for the most part, in most cases, you're going to need general liability insurance for almost any type of business. So it is often called the primary layer of protection, and it covers most claims from non-employees that are third party who may sue you or demand some kind of compensation due to some kind of incident within your property or involving one of your services or products. And a lot of the time, even if you don't want general liability insurance and you're willing to take the risk, it's actually not optional in most cases because most landlords and most mortgage companies require you to have this protection. So the most likely need for it when it would come in handy would be if a customer, for example, slips and falls at your premises. The general liability insurance would cover their medical bills or your legal bills in case they sue you. So going into a little bit more detail, what does GLI cover? So like I said earlier, bodily injuries, so any kind of medical bills or anything associated with people slipping and falling or hurting themselves in any way at your premises. Number two is property damage, but not your property specifically, unless you combine property insurance with your general liability, giving you a business owner's policy. And we actually have a video on this channel that goes into a little bit more detail about what a business owner policy is. But the property damage portion of it would cover other people's property that you damage by accident in some way. So a great example of this would be, let's say you operate a phone repair store and you destroy somebody's phone while you're trying to repair it. Well, then in most cases, you would be covered for that phone within your general liability policy, and they would pay out for that kind of claim. Number three is any kind of legal cost associated with you fighting any kind of lawsuit that has to do with a general liability claim, like let's say somebody experiences bodily injury at your premises, that would cover the legal costs as well. But that incident must be covered under your general liability policy. So let's say one of your workers gets hurt on the job, well, that would go under workers' compensation, and that would not cover the legal costs for anything related to your workers getting hurt. That would not be a covered claim under the general liability policy. Again, that would be under workers' compensation. So it must be legal costs that are associated with bodily injury or property damage that are covered under the general liability policy endorsements. And remember, policies under different carriers vary. You want to make sure you understand your limits. You want to make sure that you understand the specifics. If there are any kind of additional endorsements that you need attached to your general liability policy that you need to be covered for, then you have to make sure that you look for those. Because again, like I said, your property, either the building that you work out of or the contents inside of it, like inventory or equipment, would not be covered under a regular general liability policy. You would have to turn it into a business owner's policy or get a separate property insurance coverage in order to cover any kind of a property of your own. And many times a standard general liability policy will be $1 million per occurrence or $2 million aggregate or $2 million for the entire period of time for the year. And if you have a feeling that you may actually need more than that, well, then you should request more from your broker. And listen, if you need any help with your general liability policy, your business owner's policy, or any kind of business insurance, then why don't you give us a holler at quotes.commercialinsurance.io/total risk protocol. We've been doing this for a long time. My name is Alex. I'm the owner of the company. I've written hundreds of policies personally for business owners just like yourself. So book a call with us at quotes.commercialinsurance.io/total risk protocol, and let's see what we can do for you. So let's move on. What does general liability insurance not cover? We went over this previously, but one thing that it does not cover is workers' compensation or employee-related injuries. Remember, any kind of customer that walks in and gets hurt by accident at your premises, they would be covered under general liability. But workers' compensation or employee injuries are not. That would have to be a separate policy. Another thing that's not covered is any kind of E&O or professional liability mistakes. And I can use myself as an example in my business. Let's say one of my clients sends me a lease agreement that they have with their landlord, and the landlord is asking for them to have a $2 million over $4 million policy for general liability, but I write them a $1 million over $2 million. And let's say their landlord doesn't check if they are compliant within their limits, and God forbid there's some kind of issue that happens and the claim needs to be more than $1 million over $2 million in the future, and let's say it's not, well, now the business owner is on the hook for that and they have to pay out of pocket for a claim that went over the limits, and the landlord has to pay out of pocket for a claim that went over the limits. Well, now they can sue me because I wrote the incorrect policy, even though I had the correct information to write the correct policy with the correct limits, and they can sue me, and I would have to use my E&O or professional liability insurance to cover myself in a case like that. So that's what E&O would be. That's a completely different thing, and it does not cover anything related to injury. A third thing that it does not cover is umbrella insurance or claims over policy limits. So let's say you have a general liability policy that's $2 million over $4 million, but you want to have more coverage than that because you're in a really high risk business with very high and expensive average claims. Then you're going to want to get an umbrella liability insurance that goes over the amount of coverage that you have with your general liability policy. And remember, you want to understand these exclusions so that you won't be caught off guard with any kind of insurance gaps. And you definitely want to make sure that your broker understands these insurance limits because, like what I mentioned with this example, lots of brokers make these kind of mistakes. So you got to definitely check them. And you want to have a proactive broker because what happens is sometimes policy limits may be good today, but as the business grows, the policy limits needs to change in order to cover any kind of additional risk that that business is taking on. Because remember, as the business grows, revenues grow, the size of the premise that the business operates out of may grow, the employee size or count may grow. So you need to adjust these policy limits every single year in order to stay covered and in order to stay compliant. And again, a lot of brokers do not watch out for these types of things, and they do not go over with their clients annually about what coverages to update going forward. So in what case is general liability insurance enough on its own? So if you have any business with low public traffic or minimum on-site client interaction or limited financial exposure, those would be the reasons that you would have no general liability policy. So like I mentioned before, an operation that's out of somebody's home, you probably don't have clients coming over to your home, and you do everything online. Nobody's going to be hurt on any of your premises because you don't operate out of a physical premises. You probably don't need general liability insurance. In that case, you may need cyber liability, but not general liability. Another really good example is, let's say you have a call center where you may have lots of employees, so workers' compensation is super important for you to have, but general liability is not as important because everything that you do and all client interaction are over the phone or online. Again, you probably wouldn't need general liability in that scenario, or if you have a general liability policy, the limits could be very low. And if you still need a general liability policy because your landlord requires it, well, then you can argue to have lower limits on your general liability policy because you don't have as much exposure or risk for some kind of client getting hurt on your premises because no clients visit your premises. So let's talk about when you would actually need additional coverage. So let's say you have a construction company and you are working on a very large 20-story project and your client requires you to have very high coverage limits. Well, then in that case, a general liability policy alone may not be able to cover those very high limits, and you may need to get additional coverage through an umbrella policy. And in that case, by law, since you have lots of employees, you would need workers' compensation as well, especially considering that being a contractor is a very dangerous job. And now let's change the example and say that you run some sort of financial services company. Well, you're probably going to need a professional liability or E&O policy, like I mentioned for myself as an insurance broker, or maybe an accountant, CPA, or some sort of other financial consultant where they could be on the hook for some kind of financial losses that their clients could experience as a result of some kind of neglect or some kind of issue that you have presented as a professional within their financial situation. So let's keep that example and say that you are still a financial services company and you hold a lot of sensitive customer data, like a CPA firm, for example, which has EIN numbers, social security numbers, people's home addresses, bank account access, credit card account access. Well, they have a lot of very secure information that they need to store. And let's say if that information gets leaked and they have some sort of data breach, well, then their customers are going to go after them for that issue. So they're going to want to have a cyber liability policy that protects them in case an event similar to that. So we covered a lot in this video, but let's go over a recap on general liability. Number one, it's essential for covering common risks like bodily injury, property damage to other people's property, your customer's property, and legal costs associated with any kind of covered claim that's due to property damage or bodily injury of a customer. Number two, general liability policies have their limits. They do not cover employee-related injuries or professional mistakes, which in most cases would be a very bare minimum thing to cover. So in a lot of businesses, you may need 2 or 3 policies to cover yourself as a business properly. And number 3 is it may be enough just for a small, low-risk business with very small claim potentials, but it may not be enough for number 4 over here, like high-risk operations, which may need additional coverages or at least higher coverage limits on their general liability policies, like, let's say, a general contractor company in New York where a claim could easily be over $1 million, where that company would probably need umbrella insurance to fully cover themselves for all types of potential risks. And here's a nice bonus tip for those of you who have stuck around to the end of the video. And that bonus tip is annually reviewing your policy. I know I mentioned this before, but let's say you have a broker who doesn't do that with you currently, then you probably need to change your broker, because you have to make sure that your coverage limits and the policies that you currently have within your business cover all of the potential and likely risks that could happen within your business. And if your current broker doesn't sit down and go over these things with you annually, you should change your broker, because businesses evolve and so should your coverage. Okay? And if you are looking for a proactive broker who is looking over your policy annually with you to make sure that you are properly covered, then again, contact us at quotes.commercialinsurance-io/total risk protocol. When you click that link, you can book a call to speak to our team, and we can look over all your policy documents and see what we could do for you and see if you're properly being covered. See if you're overpaying on your premiums. See what coverages that you don't actually need and what you could remove and save on your premiums. And hopefully we can create the best business insurance experience you could possibly have within your business. So with that, I hope that you learned a lot about general liability and business insurance in general, and thank you so much for watching this video.